Hi, everybody, and we're on the home stretch. I'd like to welcome Tim Harris, CEO of Redflow. Redflow is a world leader in energy storage, the vital component for the next stage of the renewable energy revolution that we're now in. Redflow does everything from producing small 10 kilowatt hours in bromine flow batteries, right up to multiple megawatt hour systems, which we'll touch on today. Importantly, the batteries that Redflow produces tolerate hard work in harsh conditions. They not so much look pretty, but they certainly work pretty. Tim's background, Tim is a seasoned business executive and has extensive experience working for international companies. Prior to joining Redflow as Managing Director and CEO, Tim was the Chief Commercial Officer for Chorus, New Zealand's largest telecom infrastructure company, and prior to that spent a decade in senior exec roles with BT, which is one of the largest British telecommunications company. So with that, maybe I'll just come back to Tim and we can start the conversation. Would be great to, there's a lot of conversation at the moment about COP26 and environmental challenges, and there's a real push towards renewable and zero carbon and so on, or positive carbon for some companies. But there are some challenges as we move to more and more renewable energy. Can you maybe highlight to us what some of those challenges are, and importantly, how Redflow solves them?
Well, I think when you look at some of the coverage around COP26, you can either be sort of glass half full or glass half empty about these components. I mean, clearly the messages that's coming across from governments and corporates is that achievement of the Paris Agreement goals and reducing global warming to 1.5% is really challenging. But at the same time, I think there's a growing recognition that more action is required. And that action means putting more and more renewables into our economy and into our kind of power system. And we're seeing some great progress in some countries and some states, even in Australia, about achieving some of those renewable energy goals. But it's not a straightforward slam dunk. And what I think you're seeing is you're getting more and more renewable energy hitting the grid. Is that the simple fact is that the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow. And so what you're seeing sometimes is a higher level of volatility around prices and things like curtailment, where you're generating so much renewable energy, it's literally got nowhere to go. So I think increasingly energy storage really sits at the heart of us achieving a low carbon future. And I think the nature of that energy storage requirements is also shifting. Whereas previously energy storage was all about sort of stabilizing the grid, I think increasingly focus is turning towards how do you optimize that renewable energy? How can you shift that energy when it's being generated during the day to when it's hitting kind of peak periods during the evening? And some places like California are really kind of struggling with that, where they're getting a legislated element of having definite levels of renewable energy by kind of 2050. But you're seeing these billboards sprouting up around California asking people to curtail their energy use during those kind of peak times from 4 to 9 p.m. So that's really where we see the shift of energy storage going. And we think that many companies and many governments are starting to look beyond lithium to provide technology solutions for that. And that's really where we think Redflow has got a tremendous role to play.
And then in terms of battery solutions generally for renewable energy, is it a case of, and we're still obviously in the early days for everybody, but is it a case of one battery wins all? Or is there going to be multiple solutions, do you think, depending on what the needs of the end user are?
Oh, look, there's going to be multiple different technology solutions out there to fit different needs. And often when we start to think about where is our competition, we actually think the market is growing that large. There's going to be lots of different solutions out there in the market. Lithium we often liken to a sprinter, excellent for putting lots and lots of power into the grid over short duration. But when you start to look beyond kind of 4+ hours to beyond 12 hours and sometimes even 24 hours, we need new technology solutions for that. And so you've got pumped hydro, which has been our traditional element of kind of energy storage, but it's very expensive to do. And clearly there's limitations geographically where you can put those versus lithium. And so what I think you'll start to see is lots and lots of different new technologies and new solutions coming through to fit different needs. So very much we think this is an and world, not an or world when it comes to existing technologies like lithium in the market. And I think you're starting to see that recognition by very important stakeholders as well. You know, earlier this year, we had the US Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, starting to tweet about flow batteries, which we're the global leaders around. And the recently released EOI for Energy Queensland here in Australia talks about the potential role of flow batteries as they start to look forward towards energy storage. So to answer your question, Ron, look, we think that there's a tremendously growing market. It's growing extremely strongly, and there's plenty of room for lots of different technologies to be able to fulfill end customers' needs.
How big is the market size at the moment, and what are people saying in terms of potential growth rates?
Oh, look, growth rates, you know, they vary a lot in terms of if you ask kind of different people. Look, you know, the opportunity that we can see at the moment is definitely in the kind of trillions of dollars in terms of opportunity. The growth of the market there has grown between sort of 35 to 40% compound annual growth on an annualized basis, and we don't see that slowing down anytime soon. But specifically, as I mentioned before, we think the shape of that demand is also changing. Earlier this week, we were delighted to announce our membership of the Long Duration Energy Storage Council that was launched at the COP yesterday. And that's a conglomerate of large corporates like Baker Hughes and BP, and also technology providers like Redflow, that is aiming to try and solve that medium to longer term energy duration space. And they believe that there's a need between about 85 to 140 terawatt hours of long duration energy storage by 2040. And they think that's going to require about $3 trillion investment. So I think we're starting to see a lot of that shift of that emphasis looking beyond the shorter duration through to medium to longer term requirements.
Can you mentioned 3 terawatt hours of demand. Can you put that in the context of, like, what sort of scale are we talking about?
So look, it's hard to kind of fathom that to some extent. But if you look at the largest deployments that we've had in terms of energy storage projects here in Australia, some of those are kind of getting up to about 100 megawatt hours. So you can times that by 1,000 and you start to see the opportunity that we think is there. The other interesting thing, I suppose, it's worthy to note is not all markets are going to mature at the same time. So if you look at California, where we're just about to install our 2 megawatt hour system in that market, they have mandated renewable energy targets, and there's predictions there that they're going to need about 11 gigawatt hours of energy storage by 2030 and 55 gigawatt hours of energy storage by 2045. So the size of that and our ability to even have a small proportion of that type of market means that we would have revenues in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
We maybe just talk about the technology for a little bit. How does Redflow's zinc bromine flow battery actually work?
Well, actually, we talk ourselves as being a battery, but actually we're a machine. We have our battery is a zinc bromine flow battery. We have a tank which is full of electrolyte, which contains our zinc and our bromine ingredients. And then we pump that electrolyte over what we call our stack, which is where we plate zinc onto electrode surfaces to charge the battery. When we want to discharge the battery, we just run the pumps again, and that strips the zinc off the stack. And you can think of that charge and discharge as a complete cycle where we refresh the battery every single time. Zinc comes out of the electrolyte liquid and then goes back in as we charge and discharge that cycle. Critically, we think we've got a couple of advantages over other flow batteries. One is that zinc and bromine has one of the highest energy densities across our cousins in the flow battery market, up to a third over vanadium. The second element is that we use zinc, which is the fourth most abundant mineral in the world. So our ability to get costs down out of the battery as we start to tap into those kind of raw ingredients, we think is very important. And we can actually do things with our batteries that other chemistries and batteries can't. One of the important things that we've developed this year is what we call our hibernation mode. So our ability to kind of charge the battery to 100% and leave it there dormant 100% charged to when it's required. So kind of think of that as energy in a bottle. And we can store that energy without any degradation for days, weeks, and months. And that's the innovation that we introduced in terms of our work with Optus to address bushfire sites across Australia. And it's generating a lot of interest from customers because sometimes they want to shift from a cycling battery which flow batteries are extremely good at. But say there's a natural weather event or you're going to face some grid outages sometime in the future, you can charge up our battery to be ready for those kind of events using exactly the same battery. And we think that's pretty unique in the battery world. And we have a number of customers who are particularly excited about it, especially those ones who've experienced some of the dramatic challenges that in the US, like the Texas freeze that happened earlier on this year.
Are there many moving parts in the battery?
Yeah, so we have pumps, and that's really cycling the battery that basically takes the electrolyte and then puts that onto our stack. We also have electronics, so we can monitor the battery performance, and that feeds a huge amount of data and information into our battery management system that sits in the cloud. But critically, as we start to look forward, we think that provides an asset for us. We're often, today's lithium-based solutions are a disposal. You start to use it, it comes to end of life, and you have to dispose of that, and we all know about the challenges of recycling. If you think about our battery as a machine and an asset, we can replace those parts and service those parts over the lifetime of the 10-year battery and potentially even beyond. So instead of thinking about your energy storage system as a disposable, you can start to think about that as an asset. And we think increasingly corporate and utility customers are starting to think about their energy storage systems as wanting something that they can care and maintain properly and maximize the performance and longevity of those assets.
And then I guess that brings another point about lithium batteries, is that it has to be disposed of at some point, and it actually creates, like, it's great to be using batteries now, but you're creating an even probably worse environmental problem down the track.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things certainly I've seen in talking to customers in the market over the last 6 months is that product stewardship. Lots of questions about what your carbon footprint is in terms of producing the battery, and lots of questions about recycling and disposal of batteries. And we know, especially here in Australia, that effective technical and commercial recycling of lithium batteries still remains really challenging. We think that's a strong point that we have. Our battery is mostly heavy-duty plastics, it's electronics, and it's in our electrolyte. We can recondition and reuse our electrolyte, and we've proven for some end-of-life batteries that we can take that HDPE and the electronics through fairly standard recycling processes, and we've done that with a leading Brisbane recycling company. So we think that kind of product stewardship as we're going forward is going to become increasingly important, and we think that provides a strong value proposition for us.
So not only is our battery is good for the environment, but a Redflow zinc bromine battery is better for the environment.
Well, we don't want to solve today's problem but create another one tomorrow. Yeah. And I think what we are seeing, whether it's duration, whether it's kind of product stewardship, or you're kind of moving away from a CapEx to a levelized cost of storage perspective, I think people are starting to rethink energy storage in a much more mature way. And that's where we're starting to see recognition that chemistries like flow batteries actually are starting to have a very important role to play. And that's even being recognised by the Australian government. And we were delighted to be cited in the latest Australian Emissions Technology Roadmap as an exciting company and alternative in the energy storage space, which is fantastic for us.
You talked about some of the qualities of the zinc bromine flow battery, some of the positives, obviously. Another positive is thermal runaway. And not that long ago here in Victoria, there was a big fire in the lithium battery facility. Can you talk about thermal runaway and why zinc bromine flow batteries are different?
Yeah, look, one of the characteristics of lithium batteries is you have so much power packed into that very small form factor. There's a lot of energy in there. And we know that when some of those lithium batteries are not treated well, or there's flaws in manufacturing, that they have this risk of thermal runaway. And when that fire starts happening, that's very, very difficult to put out. And I think we've witnessed that in Victoria with the Tesla system down there, but there also have been some other reasonably high profile fires in places like Beijing, where a number of firefighters were killed, and also in Idaho in the US. And that kind of safety aspect, I think, is increasingly coming into focus, not only because of the risk of fire, but what precautions need to be made around if a fire breaks out, what kind of emergency services need to be trained and put into place to make sure that they can manage that pretty dangerous situation. On the Redflow side, we use bromine, and bromine is often used as a fire retardant in a number of industries. And we've recently actually taken our electrolyte through a third-party independent flash testing here in Australia that shows no sign of any kind of thermal runaway up to 80 degrees C. So when you're thinking about those industries that are very conscious of that fire risk, when you're thinking about high density areas with populations, then we think we've got a clear differentiation versus lithium. I think the other component that we see has come through in the last 12 months is about supply chain. We believe that there's increasingly signs of supply side shortages with lithium and some really quite massive increases in the prices of lithium that are starting to come through the supply chain. So we think that's going to lead to prices of increases, and we've seen some evidence of that in the market. Whereas we're just at the start of our cost curve down, and our form factor and the fact that we use things like zinc, which we talked about that lowest cost before, means that we have a very high confidence of getting to a low price point to where lithium is today, and even potentially below that as we start to scale.
Speaking of scale, a little while back, the company announced a contract in the US with Energia. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Energia. Yep.
Energia, sorry, I can never pronounce it correctly. Energia, which was a 2 megawatt hour project. Can you tell us why did they pick the Redflow energy storage battery? And also, can you give us an update on where that project's at?
Well, the Energia were always interested in experimenting with a flow battery, and this is a project that's been done in collaboration with the Californian Energy Commission, which is actively pursuing non-lithium energy storage solutions in the market, given some of the challenges I talked before in California. We know that they looked at other flow battery chemistries, particularly vanadium. And one of the things that I think won us the day through is our efficiency, the fact they were more familiar with zinc bromine, but also the footprint where they had to put that 2 megawatt hours. The vanadium, because of their smaller energy, their kind of lower energy density, couldn't quite fit in that concrete pad which had already been specified. So we were delighted to get that purchase order. It's important for us in a couple of ways. Firstly, it takes us into the megawatt hour scale, and we're building our energy pods, which are about 160 to 200 kilowatt hours each, which is going to be our building block to megawatt hour high voltage systems. And critically, it's the beachhead into the Californian market. The US is the largest energy storage market in the world, and California represents about 50% of that market. So creating a flagship product within which to launch ourselves into the US market, it made a lot of positives for us. We're delighted now to tell you that those energy pods were offloaded. Final ones were offloaded after lying in weeks in a boat off Long Island 2 weeks ago. They've now literally been deployed on site, and we have our US and Australian technicians working to install and commission that over the coming weeks. So all things going well, we're expecting to turn the lights on in that system in the next probably 3 to 4 weeks. And that's a really important, tremendously exciting opportunity and flagship for us. It's going to be daily cycling, so it's that energy arbitrage where you're taking cheap energy during the day and discharging that during the evening. And in those markets like California, where a lot of corporates are really struggling with those kind of high costs, we think that that project really presents a really tremendous reference point for us in that US market and at the megawatt hour scale in places like Australia and beyond.
How are you thinking about growing in the US market? We've had multiple companies over the last today and yesterday talking about how they've taken Australian technology and taking it offshore. How are you thinking about growth in the US market? Are you going to try and be everything for everybody across all states, or are you going to focus in tightly on one or two states or one or two industries, or can you expand on that?
Yeah, look, I think you've got to view the US as being actually 50 countries in one sometimes, and when you get a whole bunch of different Americans on the line from the East Coast, Texas and the West Coast, you can see those differences. Look, so it's a huge market, and if we don't focus properly, we can do a lot of things, but do things thinly and not very well. We think there's opportunities for us across a number of fronts. One is this kind of commercial, industrial, energia type deployments where there's clearly an arbitrage opportunity to have that, to store energy and do that daily discharging that we talked about previously. And that's probably in the ranges, you know, half a megawatt hour to up to kind of 10 megawatt hours. And we think there's lots and lots of opportunity for us there. In terms of geographical focus, you know, we think California is probably more than enough for us at the moment, but we are still pursuing some strategic opportunities in other markets like Texas that we think also are particularly interesting and in customers that are very, very interested in our technology. At the same time, you know, we want to leverage our experience and the credibility that we've developed by working with Optus here in Australia, particularly around the bushfires. They call them wildfires over there, but again, it's a really key issue in California that's getting worse and not better. And so, you know, we've had some discussions with some US telcos who are very interested in what we can do in combining that low fire risk, hibernation mode and siping capability that our battery has. But also, you know, municipalities and other things where there's a lot of what they call public service utility cutoffs of the grid at times of high winds and high fire risk. So creating those kind of community type batteries to address that, we think is also a major opportunity for us in California.
And the energia contract, just even the awarding of that contract, did that lift the profile of Redflow in the US? Have you seen positive levels of inquiry and you know, opportunities springboarding off the back of it?
Look, absolutely. You know, I think, you know, we've, from the Redflow perspective, you know, previously the US wasn't really a focus for us, but we decided, given the fact that we're going to have a lighthouse reference project in the largest energy storage market in the world that's been sponsored by the California Energy Commission and is going to be owned by, we think, one of the most innovative new energy companies in the world, is tremendously exciting. And that's generated a lot of interest from end customers, but it's also generated a lot of interest from what we call EPC companies, so engineering, procurement, and construction companies, who often have the job of designing, reviewing technologies and implementing renewable energy projects across the US. So we've been managed to engage some of the world's largest EPC companies that are based in the US around this opportunity and what we're doing with energia, and that's directly led on to a number of end customer engagements that otherwise we wouldn't really have the opportunity to go and engage with. We think we've got something unique to provide. As I think I said before, increasingly companies are starting to look beyond lithium. So we think we're very, very well placed to be able to go and engage with these customers that are looking for something innovative and new and be able to convert those, what we have in our current sales pipeline, into orders in 2022.
So speaking of significant customers, and we've got a stack of questions, we're just not going to have any time to cover them all. I'm trying to do as much as we can. But you talked about significant customers. You know, Redflow was named in an RFI recently. The company announced that on the exchange, the RFI was issued by a large listed US corporate, and Redflow was listed as an approved supplier of flow batteries on a preliminary basis. There's a few investors interested to understand if there's any update on that process and that large listed US corporate's evaluation of it.
So we're continuing to engage with participants in that process, and you know, we remain very close to the end customer around that. What I can say is that, you know, that process is ongoing. We believe we still remain that preferred energy storage technology as the end customer is going through that process, and clearly as we hit some of those milestones, we will announce to the market you know, how those have progressed for us. What I can say is, look, this end customer has extremely aggressive renewable energy targets, and we think they're the leader in their industry around what they're trying to achieve with renewable energy across their portfolio. And so hopefully as this progresses and we start to get some traction in terms of deployment of our batteries with this customer, we think that's going to have a very significant halo effect and credibility that we want to latch onto both in the US market and beyond. And what we are doing, you know, following our successful capital raise earlier on this year, is starting to build up some of those capabilities, both on the delivery and business development side in the US, so we can capture some of that momentum that the Energia project is going to hopefully enable, but also hopefully as we progress this other opportunity with this large corporate as well.
So the company recently completed a successful placement and entitlement offer. What's the use of that funds? Is that partly going to be to drive this growth opportunity in the US and the larger project opportunities that you see?
Absolutely. I think for us, that capital raise is really enabling us to think about strategic accelerated growth. We want to achieve a couple of things over the next, 3 to 6 months, which we think are important, again, to build on the foundations that we've created over the last 2 years. That includes, launch of our Gen 3 product, commercializing our kind of energy pod and having that a really core part of our portfolio, and establishing some further reference projects, particularly in that kind of megawatt hour type space. But that investment is also allowing us to invest in the front end of the business. It's allowing us to invest in marketing, it's allowing us to invest in sales, it's allowing us to invest further, I think, in some of the features around our battery that's really going to set us apart in the market. And so one of the things that we are doing is looking to see how we can maximize our facility in Thailand, how we can diversify our supply chain and materials as we start to grow. But critically, we're actually looking beyond what we think that our facility in Thailand is capable of, and starting to think about that next phase of growth beyond that kind of 60 megawatt hours, because we want to be ready for that when hopefully we're able to unlock that level of demand, given some of the pipeline that we're looking at today.
Just make sure I wasn't on mute. We're running out of time. Maybe just a final question, because really the opportunities is massive, and the company's in a really interesting position given all the fundamentals, how they're shifting in terms of energy and energy usage. What most excites you about what you're seeing? And, I'm assuming you're not trying to boil the ocean, because that never works, but, what most excites you, and what do you see as the most immediate opportunity for the company?
I think when I see, Redflow has been on a journey, there's little doubt about that. And if you asked a lot of people 10 years ago about energy storage and flow batteries, you would have got a bit of a blank. And one thing that we can honestly say when we look around at the energy storage market, particularly in that kind of medium to longer term duration, is no one has the market and field experience that we have. Now, some of that has been hard earned, and we often say to our customers, we wear our grey hair with pride. But if you look at that market, our experience that we have in terms of deployment of our batteries in the field, the fact that we now have over 160 deployments, we've delivered over 1.5 gigawatt hours of energy to our customer, puts us in an extremely strong position to ramp up. And so when I start to look at the market and start to look at, there's a lot of exciting technologies out there at the moment. We don't believe that any other company is in the position that we can to leverage that opportunity. And we think the wave of demand for that medium to longer term energy storage duration, which is coming. So I'm tremendously excited about that. It's going to mean that we're still going to need to be focused. We're going to still need to be focused on those commercial and industrial opportunities that we think present the best opportunity for us to drive shareholder value. But we also want to look beyond that, because we can see that if we're able to catch this wave, it's a big one. And on a global basis, Redflow has got the tremendous opportunity to be a very, very large player, not only in terms of revenue and size, but in terms of helping the world really create a low emissions future.
Tim, we're right on time. Thank you very much for talking through the Redflow technology, growth opportunities, and how you're becoming even more and more an essential part of that renewable energy chain. So thank you, Tim, and thank you for everybody. And we'll step off the stage and get ready for the next speaker. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.